Every morning before school, he'd kiss her forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd pack his lunch with little notes that said things like, "I'm proud of you, just for being who you are." They had their own rhythm, dancing in the kitchen, sharing a blanket during scary movies, and laughing at jokes that only they understood. People used to say they were more like best friends than mother and son, and maybe that wasn't too far off. After his dad passed away, it was just the two of them. They stuck together through everything: grocery runs, late-night drives, even those quiet dinners when the grief was too heavy for words. He never blamed her for trying to move forward. But he never expected the person she'd choose. When she finally told him the truth, the words hit harder than any punch ever could. She wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying the baby of someone he trusted. Someone who had slept on their couch, shared meals at their table, and called her "Ma" like it meant nothing. How did it even start? Why hadn't anyone seen the signs? He didn't scream or cry. He just stared at her like she was a stranger. And after that, he wasn't the same. Weeks later, when all that pain had built up past breaking point, he did something no one expected. It wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, deliberate, like the way heartbreak works when it's been simmering too long. And by the time he was done, everything they had built was gone. What would you do if your best friend got your mom pregnant? Could you live with it, or would it tear you apart? Before it all fell apart, Xavier's life had its own rhythm, a kind of loyalty that came from growing up together. Their neighborhood, Riverdale, Georgia, was one of those small suburbs where people waved at each other, and everybody knew everybody's business. Friday nights meant football games, and the barbershop was the place to swap advice about life. Xavier Ward was 19, a high school senior with a broad frame, soft eyes, and a quiet presence that stood out more than anything he ever said. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but he carried a calm strength that made people respect him. He'd been captain of the basketball team and had a kind of patience most teenagers didn't. But those who really knew him, could tell his silence wasn't natural. It came from loss. Xavier had been 14 when his father, Marcus, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. After that, everything changed. His mom, Marcia, stepped up, working long night shifts as a nurse while still making time to cheer for him at every game. She was tough, but her love was obvious in the little things: the full fridge, the hallway light left on when he got home late. After Marcus died, Xavier became her whole world, and she became his anchor. But he never had to carry the weight alone, thanks to Cordell. Cordell Price wasn't just a best friend, he was practically family. He didn't knock when he came over anymore. He just walked in like he belonged there. At 19, Cordell was goofy, always humming songs under his breath, with messy hair and scuffed sneakers. He and Xavier had been inseparable since birth, thanks to their moms, Marcia and Tanisha, who had been best friends since high school. The boys grew up like brothers, spending weekends in each other's living rooms, playing video games, helping with backyard cookouts, and opening Christmas presents together. If Xavier got in trouble, Cordell often got punished too, just because that's how close they were. But after Xavier's dad passed, things shifted. Cordell started hanging around their house more than his own. And maybe that's where everything started going wrong. Some nights, Cordell stayed over just to keep Xavier company. Other nights, he showed up unannounced, grabbing the remote and sitting down with Marcia like it was his second home. He'd help carry the groceries, take out the trash, and crack jokes just to make her laugh on tough days. Xavier once teased, "Mom's got 2 sons, one she gave birth to, and one on loan." It was funny then. Until it wasn't. Because borrowed family only works when the boundaries stay clear. But what happens when they don't? At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was early 2023, and life rolled on as usual, 2 best friends finishing senior year, eating dinner at the same table, and making plans for the future. Xavier was deep into college applications, and Cordell was trying to break into music. Marcia worked the night shift, trusted them both, and believed she'd done her job raising them right. And maybe she had. But sometimes, all it takes is one secret, one crossed line, one uncomfortable silence. And in a neighborhood like Riverdale, where families are tight and trust runs deep, betrayal doesn't just hurt, it leaves cracks that never fully heal. Grief can change a home. It shifts the air, blurs the lines of what feels normal. Sometimes, it even makes the familiar feel distant. By spring, Xavier had settled into his usual rhythm: basketball, homework, college essays. He kept his head down, trying to make his dad proud. But something in the house had changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things, the kind you brush off. Cordell used to cheer at every home game, but now his spot on the bleachers was empty. Xavier would glance at the crowd, hoping to see his best friend's grin, but the seat stayed vacant. Then there were the times when Cordell stayed behind after practice. Xavier would leave him at the house, head off to practice, and return hours later, only to find him still there. But this time, it wasn't like before. Cordell wasn't gaming or lounging in the living room. He was sitting in the kitchen with Marcia, deep in conversation, like they were sharing something Xavier wasn't part of. It felt different. One day, Xavier came home after practice and walked into the kitchen just as the room fell silent. Cordell cleared his throat awkwardly. And Marcia smiled a little too fast. The air felt thick. The moment passed in seconds, but the uneasy feeling stuck with him. Maybe they were just talking about something private. Maybe it was nothing. He told himself that, over and over. After all, they'd leaned on each other since Marcus died. There was no reason to question it. Not yet. But the silence kept growing. Some nights, after away games, Xavier would come home late and hear laughter. Cordell's laugh. But it wasn't coming from the living room. Or the kitchen. It was coming from the hallway that led to his mother's bedroom. Xavier would freeze, listening in the dark. The laughter would stop. Then he'd hear a door quietly click shut, and the house would go still. Still, Xavier said nothing. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe it hurt too much to even think about. This was Cordell, his brother in everything but blood. And this was his mom, the one person who had always kept him safe. He didn't have proof. Just uneasy feelings, odd moments, and a silence that felt too loud to ignore. And silence can be deafening. When people stop laughing where they used to, when they drift from you but stay close to those you trust most, it leaves you with questions you don't know how to ask. Xavier didn't ask. He didn't say a word. But inside, he was pulling away, from the game, from his friends, from everything that used to matter. Not because he wanted to. But because he didn't know how to handle what he was feeling. His grades slipped, not enough to cause a scene, but enough for people to notice. His teachers started checking in. His friends asked what was wrong. He wasn't as sharp on the court either. He made excuses, said he was tired, said he had homework. But the truth was, he didn't want to go home. Because home didn't feel like home anymore. Xavier's game started slipping. His defense slowed. His focus wavered. Coach figured it was just senior burnout, but it wasn't that simple. Xavier had too much on his mind. He'd started journaling again, something his dad had taught him when he was younger. When your head feels too full, write it down. That's how you figure out what's real. But now, what he wrote wasn't clear. It was messy. Scrambled. Just fragments of thoughts. Am I losing it, or did I already lose? The silence is heavy. I can't be angry at what I can't prove. And then there were the things that didn't add up. Like the hoodie he found in the laundry, Cordell's hoodie. It wasn't just that it was there. It was that it smelled freshly washed, like someone had worn it recently. Or the cologne he found in his mom's car, a scent he didn't recognize. Xavier didn't wear cologne, and as far as he knew, his mom wasn't dating anyone. So why was it there? He started noticing more. Watching more closely. And then, one night, he came home from the gym, tossed his bag by the stairs, and walked into the kitchen. Cordell was there. Shirtless. It was almost 10:30 at night. The fridge door was open. And a glass of water sat on the counter like he'd made himself right at home. Xavier froze. Cordell turned casually, like nothing was weird. "What's up, bro?" Xavier nodded stiffly, his chest tight. A second later, Marcia walked in from the hallway, pulling her robe tighter around her waist. She blinked, hesitated, then said quickly, "He spilled juice on himself. I gave him something to clean up with." Nobody mentioned it again. But Xavier didn't forget. He couldn't. Because no matter how many times he tried to push the thoughts away, nothing felt innocent anymore. Still, he didn't say anything. Not to his coach. Not to his friends. Not even in his journal. How do you accuse your mom of something like that? How do you look her in the eyes, the woman who raised you, protected you, and ask if she's sleeping with your best friend? You don't. You carry it. Until something cracks. Some moment split your life in two, before you knew, and after you couldn't unknow. For Xavier Ward, that moment came on New Year's Eve. December 31st, 2023. The party was huge. The house was packed with teenagers and 20-somethings from all over Riverdale. Music blasted through the speakers. Bottles clinked. Laughter filled the air. It was the kind of night that felt endless, the kind of party that capped off a long year with unforgettable memories. But not all memories are good. Xavier had come with a couple of teammates. Cordell was already there, moving through the crowd, drink in hand, laughing too loud. He was acting wilder than usual, but Xavier let it slide. People got loose on New Year's. Until Cordell found him. 1 second, Xavier was by the back porch, grabbing a soda. The next, Cordell stumbled over, grinning like he had a secret. "Yo, bro. Come here. I gotta tell you something." He pulled Xavier aside, behind a group of dancers, into the narrow hallway near the coat closet. His breath smelled like whiskey. His eyes were glossy. He leaned in, laughing. "Man, you're not gonna believe this." He paused, swaying slightly. "Your mom. She's pregnant." Xavier blinked, confused. "What?" Cordell's grin widened. "And it's mine." The words hit like a punch to the chest. Xavier's mind scrambled for an explanation, for anything that could make this make sense. But Cordell just laughed again, slower this time, like he was proud. "We didn't mean to," he said, his voice slurring. "But we love each other, bro. You'll get it someday." That was it. No apology. No shame. Just drunken certainty. Xavier didn't punch him. He didn't yell. He didn't even blink. He just turned and walked out the front door, down the sidewalk, past the cars parked on the curb. He sat on the cold concrete, and he stayed there. 4 hours. People came and went. The countdown happened. Fireworks lit up the sky. Someone tried to get him to come back inside, but he didn't move. Because how do you react to something like that? How do you process a betrayal that deep, that layered? This wasn't just his best friend. This was his brother. And it wasn't just any woman. It was his mom. The two people he trusted most, the two people who raised him, one by blood, the other by bond, had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Xavier never told anyone what happened that night, that hallway had never felt longer. Each step was heavy, dragging invisible weights as Xavier moved forward, the knife cold and firm in his grip. His mind was blank and full at the same time, a cacophony of thoughts that didn't form words, just feelings, betrayal, anger, sadness, and something deeper. Something darker. He reached the doorway and stopped, his breath shallow. Marcia's gentle breathing filled the quiet room. She looked peaceful, untouched by the storm that had wrecked him. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the one who had shattered his world. This was his mother. The woman who wiped his tears when he scraped his knees, cheered for him at every game, and told him bedtime stories when he was little. But it was also the woman who had lied to him, betrayed him, and crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His grip on the knife tightened. For a split second, he imagined it, what it would feel like to let all the rage and hurt explode out of him. To end the pain, to make her feel even a fraction of what he'd been carrying. But then he blinked, and the image dissolved. This wasn't him. This wasn't who he was. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the dim outline of her face. He loosened his grip on the knife and stepped back, his chest heaving as silent sobs racked his body. He had come here looking for something, a confrontation, maybe closure, but all he found was emptiness. He dropped the knife on the carpet, where it landed with a soft thud, and turned away. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out. Away from this house. Away from her. Away from everything. As he walked back down the hallway, he glanced at the photos on the wall, snapshots of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. There was a picture of him and Cordell, grinning with their arms around each other after a championship game. Another of his mom, holding him on her hip when he was barely a toddler, both of them laughing. He looked away. By the time he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him like a slap. It was sharp, biting, but it didn't wake him from the haze he was in. Nothing could. Xavier didn't know what was next. He didn't know how to fix what had been broken, or if it could even be fixed. All he knew was that he couldn't stay. Not here. Not anymore. So he walked. Down the street, past the houses where lights still glowed behind drawn curtains. Past the memories that haunted every corner. Past everything that had once been home. And as he walked, he made a silent promise to himself. He would survive this. Somehow, someday, he would rebuild. But not for them. For him, her breathing was slow. Steady. She didn't hear him come in. Xavier stood there for a moment, just watching her. Maybe it was a few seconds. Maybe longer. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He just took a step forward, and then he stabbed her. Once. Then again. A clean, deep wound to the chest. Marcia's eyes flew open, wide with shock. Her mouth opened, and she tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked whisper of his name. Zay. But it was already too late. The sound left her lips, but not her lungs. Her hand reached toward him, trembling, desperate to grab hold of something, anything, but it never made it. Xavier stepped back, dropped the knife onto the floor beside the bed with a dull, metallic clatter, and walked away. No rush. No panic. Just, away. He moved down the hallway and slid to the floor, back against the wall, knees bent, arms resting loosely at his sides. Then he took out his phone and dialed 911. When the operator picked up, his voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. "I killed my mother," he said. "I didn't know what else to do." The operator kept asking questions, her voice calm but urgent. Xavier barely seemed to hear her. He just kept repeating the same thing, over and over, like it was the only sentence he had left. "She was all I had, and she broke me." By the time the sirens filled the quiet street outside, Xavier was still sitting there on the floor. Cross-legged. Silent. His eyes were red, but dry. No pacing. No tears. Just waiting. The front door was unlocked. When the police arrived, they didn't have to break anything down or force their way in. Xavier hadn't run. He hadn't tried to hide the evidence. The 911 call had already told them everything they needed to know. And when they saw him sitting there, his face calm, his hands resting limply on his knees, they asked him to stand. He did. They cuffed his wrists. He didn't flinch. As they led him outside, the quiet neighborhood of Windmere Drive stirred from its sleepy stillness. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, faces pale and wide-eyed. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off mailboxes, lawn ornaments, and white picket fences. For the first time in years, the quiet block had something to talk about. Back inside the house, in the dimly lit bedroom, the scene was eerily calm. There was no sign of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. No defensive wounds. No footprints leading out the back door. Just Marcia Ward, lying in her bed, still and lifeless, her eyes closed as if she'd simply gone to sleep and never woken up. The blood had spread slowly across her chest, soaking into the sheets beneath her. The knife, a kitchen-grade, 8-inch blade, lay on the floor near the nightstand. It had been wiped once, not thoroughly, just enough to smear the fingerprints without erasing them completely. Investigators searched the house for signs of a break-in but found nothing. No forced entry. No footprints. No signs of a third party. In Xavier's room, beneath the mattress, they found a small, worn leather notebook. Spiral-bound. Torn at the corners. It was his journal. The pages were filled with thoughts, some written carefully in neat lines, others scribbled over in thick, angry strokes. There were dates. Questions. Grief. I feel invisible in my own house. Why would she choose him? Of all people, why Cordell? Is it still betrayal if it never stops hurting? They don't even look sorry. I don't know if I'm crazy, or just tired of surviving. The journal didn't excuse what had happened that night, but it explained the slow unraveling, the quiet descent, leading up to it. An unraveling that no one else had noticed. Not his friends. Not his coach. Not even Marcia. Detectives reviewed the journal against what they already knew. The entries matched the timeline perfectly, the night of the party, the weeks he had stopped coming home, the moment he found the prenatal vitamins in the bathroom. He had documented everything. Every shift. Every question. Every crack in his reality. During one of the interviews, a detective asked Xavier, "Did you plan this?" Xavier looked up slowly, his eyes empty, and said, "No. I just wanted it to stop hurting." And that left them wondering. Was this the face of a cold-blooded killer? Or was it the face of a broken son, left to drown in his own grief? Because when the people you love most destroy your sense of safety. When the people you trust the deepest break you apart. Where does that leave you? And what would you have done if it were you? Sometimes, stories are uncomfortable. They tug at the threads of our understanding, forcing us to confront the darker corners of the human experience. Xavier Ward's story is not a tale of heroes or villains, it's a reflection of pain, betrayal, and the complex nature of grief. It is a story of what happens when a heart that was once full is left empty, struggling to make sense of broken trust and shattered love. This narrative is intended to evoke thought, spark conversation, and explore the fragile balance between emotional endurance and collapse. It is not meant to glorify violence, but to delve into the psychology of a young man whose world unraveled when the people he depended on betrayed him. In fiction, we find the space to ask difficult questions without easy answers. A vote of thanks. To you, the reader, thank you for joining me on this journey. Whether you felt shock, anger, sadness, or empathy, your engagement means the world. It is your willingness to explore stories like this that keeps the art of storytelling alive. Fiction exists to challenge, to entertain, and sometimes to disturb, and your presence here proves that stories, even the darkest ones, can offer something valuable: perspective. Please remember that this story is entirely fictional and was created for content and entertainment purposes. The characters, events, and places in this tale are products of imagination and should not be associated with any real-life incidents or individuals. Thank you again for reading. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that make us uncomfortable enough to think.